going on.
So welcome, Tuana, Yazici. Thank you very much for accepting to make this presentation on such a short notice, only a few days. We had planned on having another lecturer, but unfortunately he had to rush to hotspots in the world, and from where he cannot have a connection with us. So that will be for next month, I suppose. Welcome. Reading your CV is you have an exceptional young woman who is interested in such things as animal protection, environment protection. You have been a militant of those causes, and you're also an artist. And I hope that your presentation will highlight that. You have at your age many achievements under your belt. You have you just finished a master's degree. You have well, you know, I'm in awe about your accomplishments. I have raised three children, and none of them really equal what you have achieved as young. Of course, you have parents who supported you, maybe circumstances. You are a master at public relations. You know how to make connections at the highest level. I'm talking about White House and the US Congress and other things. So you have the CV is in the invitation. So please have a look at it. I think that Andreas will send it again with a video of your presentation. Tuana, you have the floor.
Before we begin, if you don't mind, Malika?
Yes.
That's Gerard. Welcome everyone again. This is Rotary Club of New York, Host Club of America, to our May 18th UN breakfast, which is chaired by Malika Abreu today. I just wanted to thank John German for bringing our guest speaker to our attention today. I think he's on the line with us. Remind everyone that at the end of today's presentation, John German will continue to have an informal international meeting. So if anyone is interested, please stay on the line after that. Malika, thank you again. Ms. Yazici, please begin. It's all yours.
I will attempt to share my screen. Do I have permission to share my screen?
Yes, you do.
Of course, yes.
Because it's not coming up right now. Let me see. Okay, I think it's working now. Can you see my screen?
Yes, now we can see it. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, perfect. So, hello everyone. As Malika mentioned, I'm Tuana Yazici. I'm a United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs Space for Women mentee, an International Institute of Space Law member, and a student helicopter pilot. I graduated a year early from university, and I also graduated a year early from my master's in international administration just last week. And now I'm headed to law school in the fall. And today I will be discussing my recently published research, a proposal for the usage of reconnaissance satellites to monitor international human and wildlife trafficking hotspots, published by Elsevier in the journal Acta Astronautica on March 4th, 2022. So fairly recently. And you might already be thinking, but aren't there detection systems in place for human and wildlife trafficking already? But my research, as its very, very short title suggests, is a full proposal to implement an international system to keep countries accountable. Now, before I get into this proposal, I would like to talk a little bit about why I pursued the expansion of space technologies for the purposes of human rights and animal welfare. As you all know, human and wildlife trafficking occurs at devastating levels all over the world, most without being properly addressed. And I would like to quickly give examples of wildlife trafficking, since it's lesser known than human trafficking. Illegal wildlife trade for elephant ivory, pangolin scales, tiger bone, rhino horn, bear bile, and rosewood are done through poachers, traffickers, and highly organized criminal syndicates. Illegal wildlife trade is valued at approximately $7 to $23 billion per year, making it one of the most lucrative illegal businesses that fuels criminals and terrorists. I've been trying to find ways to best address these issues since I was very young. Starting at age 7, I wrote and illustrated 4 children's books on animal rights, which were published, donating all profits to various animal charities. I've also created lots of artwork that have been exhibited internationally to raise awareness on these issues. And I actually painted the 2 artwork that you see here. As I grew older, I genuinely saw the power of law to directly improve the lives of others, and it was permanently etched in my soul. I then made a lifelong commitment to use my creative approach, access to education, and the opportunities that come with it to establish or update powerful preventative laws to ensure governments fulfill our moral obligation to protect all living beings. I thirsted for experiences that would help me approach the question of how the law can create preventative measures for human and wildlife trafficking, both global crimes that still have not been allotted enough resources and care despite the international laws surrounding them, and bring about an innovative approach to achieving this on a global scale. Now you might be thinking, but doesn't each country have their own laws and ways of detecting and addressing human and wildlife trafficking? But since both human and wildlife trafficking takes place across borders, with a single trafficking case possibly involving several countries at once, an international system needs to be implemented to properly monitor and keep countries accountable. We cannot, in good conscience, make technological advancements in space that have the means to track and reduce human and animal suffering and not use them due to geopolitical disagreements. Now, before discussing the main points of my research, I would like to discuss the importance of the changes made to the Kyle Bingman Amendment of 1997. The KBA to the U.S. National Defense Authorization Act had limited the resolution and availability of satellite imagery of Israel to 2 meters compared to satellite imaging companies offering images with a resolution of 0.4 to 0.7 meters. The Federal Register then published new changes to the KBA on July 21st, 2020, which allowed U.S. commercial remote sensing companies to sell high-resolution satellite images of Israel at 0.4 meters. Now, these changes to the KBA could create the pathway for other changes to the usage of reconnaissance satellite surveillance and detection of human and wildlife trafficking around the world. I propose that a new structure be implemented to use reconnaissance satellites to monitor human and wildlife trafficking by having hotspot area for these crimes under 24-hour surveillance, utilizing the highest performance limit. A section like the Global Monitoring for Security and Stability could be created under the International Telecommunication Union, which would be dedicated to the surveillance. Global Monitoring for Security and Stability was created in 2004 as part of the Global Monitoring for Environment and Security Program, which was created in 1998 by the European Commission to develop operational information services on a global scale using both space and ground-based monitoring systems in support of environment and security policy needs. Just as how global monitoring for security and stability partnered with research groups to identify the crime hotspots, the section under the ITU modeled similarly to global monitoring for security and stability could do the same to determine human and wildlife trafficking hotspots. The possible research groups I will provide would determine the various hotspots to be monitored. Under Article 13 of the UN Charter, the General Assembly is empowered to initiate studies and make recommendations regarding inter alia human rights. And these studies frequently deal with alleged violations of certain states. And since the special procedures, which is a charter-based body under the umbrella of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, reports to the General Assembly on their findings and recommendations, they could be the research group that would study historical data to file recommendations for the section of the ITU. There's not a specific committee dedicated to animal welfare in the UN that could serve as, however, there are other research groups like World Animal Protection and World Animal Net that could serve as research groups. And if a state fails to address violations in their country, then the case could be reported to the International Court of Justice by a different state. The ICJ has a symbiotic relationship with the Security Council. The 15-member council seeks to address threats to international security and can recommend that states refer their dispute to the ICJ under Article 36, paragraph 3 of the UN Charter. The Council Resolution 2388 explains how the failure to properly address national legal systems for human trafficking can be a violation of international law. Therefore, if the ITU informs the states of any violations and they fail to address these violations through their national laws, then the case in question could be brought before the Security Council and the ICJ. The same process can be followed for wildlife trafficking. I feel some of you thinking, this is all great, but why should the ITU monitor it? They don't even have reconnaissance surveillance within their powers. And for those of you who thought that, you're correct. So how can my proposal be implemented within the ITU? The success of this global system is due to its inclusion of 194 member states and a unique number of sectors, making it a prominent agency to pursue and monitor this proposition. However, before my proposal can even be implemented, the ITU governing documents must be amended to expand the functions and competence of this organization. As my proposal fits into the purposes of the telecommunication development sector of the ITU, Article 21, which states the functions and structure of the sector, could be amended to also include reconnaissance surveillance as part of their competence to protect public safety. And through Article 31, the ITU will be able to legally monitor the surveillance of selected hotspots in its member states. And lastly, through Article 25, my proposal could be implemented through a world conference, such as the World Telecommunication Development Conference that will take place June 6 to 15, where the Sustainable Development Goals will be discussed, which are global goals aligned with my proposal. And if you would like to read further into my discussion on how my proposal is aligned with the principles agreed upon by the UN remote sensing principles, the Outer Space Treaty of 1967, principles from the European Convention on Human Rights on Privacy, or read more about the national and international laws surrounding human and wildlife trafficking, you can scan this QR code right here, which will take you straight to my journal publication. And I just would like to emphasize that there are a plethora of ways and opportunities to implement this proposal. I've laid out a structure that can be taken as a starting point, an opportunity to develop into a feasible approach to protecting the inhabitants of this earth. I truly hope that my proposal can bring real change to help protect our people and animals. And I would like to thank you all for coming and listening to my presentation. I would also like to give a special thank you to John German and David Marcus for supporting my project and for recommending me as a lecturer today. We will have the Q&A now, but if you would like to ask further questions about my research, I provided my contact information here. And thank you again.
Okay,
Wow, thank you.
thank you, Tuana.
Uh,
Let's see, do we have questions in the chat room, anybody?
Maybe a bit complicated for those who are not initiated to all these terms, the ITU, International Communication.
If I may, let me start off the questions and answering. Tuana, again, thank you. I find your proposal to be fascinating. I really think you could turn this into, once you start law school, certainly you could turn this into a really fascinating paper once you learn how to do the legal research and cite the legal cases. I remember I had also majored in international law in law school, and one law professor said to me, the problem with international law, it's like trying to grab a handful of a jelly, and you know, and she was right. Which brings me to my question. Every single country in the world that's a member of the United Nations subscribes to you know, the Human Rights Declaration. Nonetheless, there are huge abuses, many abuses of human rights throughout the world by the very same countries that have signed on. So the question that I have to bring is, to me, the most obvious one, and it could be answered, I think, in a number of different ways, and that's the question of enforcement.
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, thank you for that question. And yes, that is one of the first questions. That and probably privacy concerns would be one of the first questions people have for my proposal. And like you mentioned, I talk in depth actually about that specific thing that you mentioned. It's actually a whole section in my paper. And you know, I give examples, like, for example, like China, like the Uyghurs in China, for example, you know, would China be, you know, even okay with implementing such a proposal? And the thing is,
part of the.
And the thing is that, for example, I've been having meetings with the White House National Space Council on my proposal. And because I was discussing, you know, implementing this international system, but I was advised to first pursue a national implementation before an international one for these specific reasons. Because there are a lot of, you know, like you mentioned, in international law, there are a lot of, like, you know, hoops to jump through when implementing such a proposal. And the ITU, as it stands, it's not really ready for a proposal like mine, since it, you know, works on consensus and meets every 4 years, for example. So while this proposal I'm pursuing so that this proposal gets implemented nationally, so that we have the US support when encouraging an international implementation. And for me, the International Telecommunication Union still stands as the best, the most ideal way to pursue this implementation, because it has all the 194 member states. Once it's implemented, if it's, you know, it is by consensus, but if it's implemented, the countries have to abide by it. And there's a clear, I lay out one by one how to, you know, keep countries accountable for if they don't pursue national, like, action when they're brought, you know, when this information is brought to their attention. So there are a lot of data available in this world right now, you know, by Earth observation, AI, you know, remote sensing, like, they have all this data available, but there's not a connection between, like, this data and it being processed by the government and then legal action being taken. So that's what I'm trying to accomplish with this paper, with this proposal. And I remember Malika asking, how is this different from all the remote sensing data that is, you know, that companies have at this moment? And this is how it's different, because what it's like right now is like you seeing a crime happening right in front of you and you just seeing it and not doing anything. You're not calling 911, you're just watching it happen. That's basically what's happening right now with all this data that we have. We have it all great, that's wonderful, but what's being done about it? It's not, there isn't a clear system where it's data hotspots being monitored, and then legal action is being taken. So that's what I'm trying to accomplish with this proposal. And my goal is, you said create a bigger research with this. Of course, this is just the beginning. My research will continue, but I'm also actually trying to implement a proposal like this. That's why I'm having meetings in Capitol Hill and the White House to pursue such a proposal. And I've been actually tasked with working with the private sector. This is interesting because this is a government implementation, but they have asked me to work with the private sector because the data that they have, it's public. But if we use the data from the government satellites, they're classified. So the goal is to make this as public as possible to raise the awareness while this system is being implemented. So you have to work with the private sector, use their capabilities, plus they have less restrictions. So the resolution on their satellites is much lower. For example, companies like Maxar, they're working with Ukraine right now, and they have, they show the exploitation of like human rights, and the resolution is like 12 inches, let alone like 0.4 meters. So a lot of people even ask me, how is the technology going to be able to keep up with this? We're not there yet. I'm like, I'm not even worried about the technology not being able to keep up. It improves every single day. I'm more worried about the law, like the legal side of it, because that doesn't happen overnight. The technology on the other side, that improves every second. So that's a very long answer to your question, but I wanted to touch different points so that if people have like more questions, we can go from there.
Well, I'm impressed because it took me years to get to the point where you're at right now. So that's very impressive to me. I guess unless someone else has a question, please jump in.
Yes.
But my next question would be to everything that you've said, I can agree with. But again, when you come to the question of enforcing things, and I think you've approached the right area by mentioning the need to couple this with private industry. First of all, there is no privacy. It doesn't exist anymore. Let's be honest about that. Certainly a country like China, I mean, there's nothing you can do in China without being observed by someone over something. And I'm not so sure how different it is here either, if someone really wanted to make the effort to do it. I think what we've seen, however, in what's going on in Ukraine is an example of how certainly people in the world, the West certainly, can unite behind certain ideas, fundamental principles. And so I think what you're doing is unique and important because making people aware of the issues, certainly everyone knows about these issues or we've heard about them, but putting it in the forefront and having the technology to zero in on not just discussing in a general way, but being very specific as to where these human rights abuses are happening, where these animal rights abuses are happening. That to me seems to be the way to open the door, to make the world aware of just how serious these issues are, and then to move on the political and economic front to get the enforcement behind it.
Yes, and the thing is, it is very important, especially while implementing this on a national scale. The goal is, because this is a huge undertaking when going the international route, and we can't just have like a few groups for this idea. It has, countries like the US also needs to back such a system. And for example, I'm very hopeful of this administration because I have, worked with the, Biden-Harris administration. They're very keen on using space technologies for the purposes of, human rights. And they're always looking for ways to kind of use those technologies for the betterment of like the environment and like for human rights. So this proposal kind of fits right within their, what they want to do with these technologies. And, recently they even, announced with ASAP weapon testing, like Russia, China, they all, do these tests that create like space debris and even endangering the humans on, the space stations. And it's the US initiative, again, that they put a ban to the testing for the purposes of, discontinuing like space debris, adding to that. Again, this was a US initiative that recently happened, maybe like a month ago. So all this like is happening, like they had their first National Space Council meeting December 1st, and they're already, adding more people to the Artemis Accords, like again, another US initiative, and this fairly recently. So I'm hopeful that, if something like this gets implemented nationally and it's a success, then we have like a concrete example to point to when we vouch for this on an international scale. So that's why we need as much support as possible when implementing this nationally from all these different sectors, so that we put on like a united front when vouching for this on an international scale. So that's the goal right now. Yes, it's a huge undertaking, but that doesn't scare me. There are a lot of, everyone likes to point out the, difficulties with this plan, but I like to look at it in a more positive way. Like, yes, these are the problems, but there are solutions to every single problem that is brought up with this. So, yes.
Well, I salute you, because you are correct. There are always people who will use those two terrible words, what if? Just ignore that and go on and do what you have to do. Have you had any positive reception from any other countries, any other administrations besides Biden and Harris?
Yes, actually. Well, so I had meetings in the NASA headquarters in DC with the White House National Space Council, Space Command, Space Force, and then European Space Agency. For example, the head of like the European Space Agency, he was also, I had positive feedback from everyone, and they would also all like to see how this, gets implemented, because it is a lot, but it's just such a positive way of using these space technologies. And you can only build up from here. This is just like the foundation that I'm trying to set. There are more to come after, a system like this is implemented. This is just the foundation, and I'm hoping to build even more on this. So I am trying to move as quickly as possible, and that's why I am, going the national route first, because I do realize the international one, it's going to take much longer, but I'm not, waiting around for that. We got to move along nationally before taking on the bigger monster, which is the international one.
Before we get to the international one, I have Tom McConnell who wants to ask a question, I suppose. Tom, you have the floor, Tom. Tom, unmute yourself.
Okay, good morning, Malika, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. We can.
Okay, very good, very good. Good to see you.
We can, Tom, we can hear you, but we can't see you. We see some.
Okay, how's that,
Me
Gerard? Okay,
too.
okay, very good.
Shelf of books.
Okay, can you hear me now? Yes.
We can hear
okay.
you.
Okay, very good. Okay, thank you so much, Tuana. Very interesting. I was just watching on C-SPAN last week, where for the first time in decades, the U.S. Congress and the U.S. military gave a report on UFOs. Now, I know UFOs don't necessarily come from another galaxy. They're really what it means. They're unidentified flying objects. But I was just wondering what thoughts you had on that. The United States government is finally coming out, recognizing that there is a lot of UFOs out there. I don't know if you got a chance to see it. Okay, thank you so much for joining us today. Okay.
Thank you, Thomas. And so my proposal, we're not quite there with the UFO. We're not working with the UFOs quite yet. That's after a lot of other things have happened. So I don't really know what to say too much about that, because that's not really my area at all, the UFOs. But I guess that's going to be, if they're recognizing it now and we have, more information coming on that soon, that's another problem to tackle. That's a whole other problem that we will have to face when it becomes an imminent problem. So I don't know much about that right now, but one problem at a time. One, we'll focus on this first, and then we'll tackle that one.
Yes, Tuana, talking of implementation, as President Gerard said, you have mentioned the International Court of Justice. How can you implement anything if some member states are not members of the International Court of Justice? And I'm talking about the US government. The USA is not a member of the International Court of Justice. So how do you see this?
Well, the US's Security Council is in the Security Council.
It's not the Security Council that makes those.
Well, we're not implementing anything. So we're not implementing anything to the Security Council or the International Court of Justice.
No, but then they make a judgment. And don't give me the Security Council, please. We saw that the Russian vote when they discussed when they discussed Ukraine, it's not working. It's not working. It's not working. So each country, big country, protects its own interests. But the International Court of Justice, when they make a judgment, it has its weight. And if you're not a member of that, you're not like Russian crimes in Ukraine. I mean, eventually it will be taken up by, if it's well documented, it will be taken up by the International Court of Justice. Is anyone looking into what happened in Iraq? All those crimes? There were some war crimes. So they will never be taken up. But what I'm interested in more is the human trafficking. Because
Yes.
whenever there is a war, there is movement of population, and some population just disappear. Where are they taken? How are they being exploited? How do you, like we in this morning discussion, pinpoint to those areas where they can be found?
That's a great question. And if the system that I propose were implemented, a hotspot like the one that you're talking about, we could have, perhaps seen where they were taken to. So, like you said, there are a lot of gaps in the systems that you're talking about. And in order to fill those gaps, systems like these need to slowly, be implemented so that, none of the systems that we currently have are perfect. Like you're mentioning, the International Court of Justice, the Security Council, within the UN, other, sectors, even the ITU. In this day and age, meeting every 4 years a lot happens in 4 years, and that cannot be addressed until the next meeting. So these things, they do need to be amended and changed. That's why I am starting on a national scale first. And in the meantime, I will be vouching for these changes to actually be made internationally so that these institutions will be ready for a proposal like mine to be implemented when the time comes. So that's the timeline that I have for this proposal. Because like I mentioned, the ITU, they're not really ready for a proposal like mine yet. And they need time to make these amendments. And in the UN, these changes take a lot of time. Even just simply changing the name of an organization, that takes time. So the amendments that I'm suggesting take even longer time. So in order for that to happen, a lot of things need to move simultaneously so that when the time comes, it can be implemented.
Tuana.
John, you want to identify yourself? Are you speaking? John, are you there?
Thank you. Yes, apologies. My computer died. The new one doesn't appear to do video. I've spent days trying to fix it, but at least I got my picture to finally display. A question about how it could, you could be helped, with what you're trying to do. And what I'm mindful of is a couple of things. One, the recent New York Times experience with their big megaphone, where they put out, a detailed investigative report about the faulty targeting of drone warfare, that killed a lot of innocent people, and made for a major scandal, that was acknowledged by the U.S. government, after it was done. And the question is, what do you think it would take to get some crack investigative team like the Times' video team to put together some really compelling video that could engage public opinion, because that, for me, is the basis for every campaign that I work on. Is if you have world-class video on something, you can do incredible things with it. And what I would hope for would be that something with video could catch the attention of people, of means or influence, who could do something useful about this. And working on Capitol Hill, my experience with other problems, causes, or issues is that the legislative elected officials pay attention. They all have a number. How many personal phone calls, how many email messages, how many letters do they have to get on a subject in the space of a day or a week, before it climbs up their priority list to the point where they actually have to do something about it. And so what I'm thinking is, what should we be targeting to help to make those things happen? Because without that, the universal excuse for inaction on almost anything is there's no political will for that. Well, political will comes from pressure from people who get engaged or enraged about something and take effective action. So the former chancellor of New York City Public Schools, whenever anybody said anything to him, would say, okay, last thing, would say, what do we want them to know and what do we want them to do? So that's the question. What do you want people to know? What do you want them to do? Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, John. And, like I mentioned, when implementing on a national scale, it's important to have the support of, very different sectors. So right now is, it's important to raise that support so that when this is implemented, we need the US support for the second implementation plan, which is the international implementation. And in order to do that, we need to have support nationally. So people need to be aware of such a program. People need to, recognize that this is for the benefit of, human rights and animal welfare. And this needs to be implemented in a way that, people will see that this program isn't being exploited for different purposes. Just a pure, program that's simply for the hotspots. And there's a clear system that connects the private sector to the government. And there's actual action being taken on the other end of it. So if people see this and, people support this, then the second part of the plan, which is the hardest part of it, it will be much easier to tackle than if we don't have that support. So right now is more about raising the awareness and, showing that there is effort for a national system like the one that, I'm proposing to be implemented, and for people to be aware of it and for people to support this. And especially like in Capitol Hill, raising awareness also internationally as well. So people aren't shocked when, something like this gets proposed later on for the second implementation stage. So the more people know about this, the more people support it, it makes our job easier when moving forward with this plan. So that's the goal right now. And right now, like I mentioned, I am talking with the private sector and, seeking out companies that already have certain government contracts so we can build on that and implement a proposal like the one that I'm, suggesting for a project like this to take place. So now I'm in that stage of implementation. So right now, the best I can ask for is for support and to raise awareness.
Tuana, thank you. I think you've answered John's questions quite well. Your role is, the way I see it right now, is not to solve the issues, but to bring the issues to public awareness internationally. And the rest, I think, would follow. John mentioned New York Times. Well, New York Times, well, it's a business, and they have to sell papers, they have to sell stories, they have to sell news. If you make this a hot news item, the companies like the Times will pick it up. But the hard part is what you're doing to bring this to public awareness. And for that, you know, I salute you, because that's not an easy task.
And it's huge. It's huge. It's huge. But I want to come back to the issue of privacy. This type of information is, of course, I mean, having a remote sensing system is usually for defense and for security reasons. You would not install anything like that if it's just to for peaceful uses. It's really a defense system, and I don't quite see how the ITU intervenes. The use of ITU for a country in this type of well, it's called people less enlightened than you are and we are, maybe call it spying.
So as just, I'll answer this in two parts. First of all, as you know, Gerard mentioned, there is really no such thing as almost privacy left at this point. I mean, I don't think people are quite aware of just how much they're being surveillanced constantly. So, you know, these hotspots, I mean, and it would be what I'm working on is for this to be a transparent project as well, like the government, you know, being transparent, saying these hotspots, only these hotspots will be monitored for these purposes. And that's a very important thing. And also Article 8 of the European Convention on Human Rights states that everyone has a right to respect for his private and family life, his home, his correspondence, and that there shall be no interference by a public authority with the exercise of this right, except such as is in accordance with the law and is necessary in a democratic society in the interest of national security, public safety, or the economic well-being of the country, for the prevention of disorder or crime, for the protection of health or morals, or for the protection of the rights and freedom of others. So therefore, the exception to the rule of privacy would be in line with my proposal, since the goal is to protect public safety. So there are two ways to, one legal way to answer your question and one a more general way, which is, you know, I don't think people are quite aware of just how much information is not kept private.
And I think you've answered it well. And Malika, again, in response to what you were saying, human trafficking is a crime.
Absolutely.
And there is, you know, and animal trafficking is also in many cases illegal.
Mhm.
And therefore the issue of privacy, you know, maybe as a defense attorney, you would bring it up, but legally, I think that issue can be dealt with pretty easily.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, look at all these children coming out of Ukraine. Even if they are accompanied by their mothers, there was an article on the internet that I have read. Well, many of them are being trafficked.
Well, Malika, you and I are both sitting in Midtown Manhattan,
Yes.
and I'm sure the overwhelming majority of people in New York are not aware that New York City is a hotspot for human trafficking, right down the block from where we may live.
Mhm.
And so, you know, there are a lot of young women, girls even, who are forced into kind of sex trafficking here in New York, as well as other places, obviously, but yet we would not know of it because obviously we're not coming into contact with it. Yet you might sit on a subway with someone who is a victim of this. So, you know, again, the issue, and I, you know, I applaud Tuana for what she's doing, because these are issues that affect all of us.
Yeah.
Even if we're not aware of it, we're still being affected by them.
And then remote sensing is important. I mean, how does it, how is it useful? We all know that. It's the police that has to do its job.
Well, perhaps Tuana, again, maybe you could go back over how you would use, your proposal would use, satellite information, remote sensing to come into the picture to enforce laws against human trafficking and animal trafficking, illegal animal trafficking.
Yes, and before I get into that, I just want to also point out, you mentioned, for example, Manhattan being a hotspot, and I live in Miami, for example, and at the airports in Miami, in Fort Lauderdale, at the airports, every second you're at the airport, they make an announcement about, being careful because this is one of the hotspots for human trafficking.
Yes.
You go outside in Miami, there are billboards, huge billboards, asking people to report if they see like any signs of human trafficking with like a phone number. Miami is a known hotspot for human trafficking. And, they make, the amount of announcements I've heard just like in the Miami area in South Florida, it really shows that, people are looking for ways to raise more awareness and, help tackle this issue in a more productive way. So that's why, this is a, interesting way to approach this issue. And what you said was about law enforcement and how this would, connect with that. And so remote sensing, there are many different ways of, monitoring. For example, even now, it's actually very exciting to see some companies are combining Earth observation with artificial intelligence. And, the things that they're coming up with on a daily scale, it just makes for a proposal like this even more, important right now with all this technological advancement. So you can use remote sensing data, you can use Earth observation, AI, and all those combined together. Especially with the resolutions being so low at this point, what is 12 inches? They can see that clearly from space. So monitoring those areas, and then there are also mega, this is a whole other issue, but there, some people ask, like, we don't have enough satellites, et cetera. But right now, the amount of, there are mega constellations being made, with like Starlink and other companies are, and mega constellations are, thousands of satellites. That's why they're called like a constellation, because there are so many. And that's a whole other issue of them creating debris, but that's also another research of mine on how to tackle that issue. But with this, amount of, satellites in the sky, more and more possibilities for like a close 24-hour surveillance is, being made possible through these, inventions. So not only is there, more surveillance, the detail to which the surveillance is, is being monitored, right now is the perfect time for such a system to be implemented. And like I said, there are different sorts of data that the government already process. Like I said, for environmental law too, and I state in my paper few, specific examples on how this has been used previously. But there are very few that have been used for environmental law up to this point. There's so much potential with this technology, which is why I want this to expand for the purposes of human rights and animal welfare. So, like you said, yes, governments do process this data and they act accordingly. Now I would like them to utilize it for hotspots of human trafficking and wildlife trafficking. So that's the goal now. And these are all very possible things that I'm, talking about. This isn't like 5 years into the future, 10 years into the future, like the technology and the legal side of it will be ready. No, right now we already have all these capabilities. So it's not really that like far-fetched what I'm proposing.
Mm-hmm. I would suggest, you had mentioned earlier, I don't know if our audience knows this, but you had mentioned earlier to us that you were considering several proposals from which from different law schools as to which one you would attend. My experience is some of the law schools, especially some of the Ivy League law schools, don't really specialize in what you're talking about. They make the assumption that their students are going into corporate law. So they don't really go into depth dealing with criminal law, environmental law, immigration law, that kind of thing. And I would just say whatever school what you're looking at to see whether or not they have emphasis in those areas. And one in particular is traditionally ignored by most students, much to their own, well, they pay for it later on as attorneys, and that's administrative law. Everyone knows everyone knows what criminal law is, everyone knows what civil law is, but I've even met a lot of attorneys who don't understand administrative law. No matter whatever your issues are, no matter how morally correct they might seem to you or to your clients, if they don't come under the scope of the law of the particular administration that's given oversight over these issues, you're dead in the water before you even begin. And I'll give you a specific example. Back in the 1990s, New York City had a plan to burn all of its public waste, all of its sanitation, all of its, we're talking about almost 7 million pounds per day, 24/7. And New York City was going to build a huge incinerator at the Brooklyn Navy Yard to burn the municipal solid waste from all over the city. And there were literally thousands of people at public hearings denouncing this, the pollution, the traffic, how it was going to affect people's health, the effect it would have on children, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It all fell on deaf ears. I happened to put in a brief against it, and I didn't address those issues. I addressed administrative law, meaning there were certain steps that in certain areas that had to be taken by the law of the different agencies involved. And I pointed out how these steps were being evaded, avoided, or simply, done incorrectly. And I was able to hold the project up for almost 2 years in the federal court, and it eventually died, fortunately for New York City and for the environment. But that was the only issue the federal court looked at, because it was an administrative law issue. All the other issues were perfectly fine, but legally had no, they were irrelevant to what was at hand. And so this is something I would suggest you do. Study the administrative law of certainly the United States, European Union, because those are going to be hurdles you're going to have to overcome, or whoever deals with the issues is going to have to overcome those hurdles. Anyone else have a question?
Well,
Comments?
I just want to add that there is administrative law. You already studied administrative law. I saw it in your profile, Tuana, right? You have touched upon administrative law at the undergraduate level.
I'm talking in legal studies as a law student.
Right. So so in my undergraduate, I created my own major, which was PPE, Philosophy, Politics, Economics. I took it in Oxford and I brought it to the University of Miami. And then in my graduate studies, I studied international administration, but I created my own concentration again in international space law. And so it's not, administrative, law per se, but I hope to study that and international law in law school and focus more on that. And it is correct, like, you said that most law schools aren't, concentrated in what I'm concentrating in, but more and more, if you look at, for example, space law, it's popping up at these, in these universities now. And
Correct.
it's become more of because it's a fairly new sector. I mean,
Yes.
It's such a small sector that I've gotten to know a huge part of the sector fairly, quickly, because that's what's exciting about it, is because you get to be part of the people who architect the way for the future of the sector. So I recognize that, some law schools don't have that, but I have been, the reason why I mentioned my undergrad and like graduate studies is because I'm, if there are some gaps in, the education, I like to fill it by, creating my own path within the university. So even though they might not have that, it's actually even more exciting for me because, for example, I could, help in a way of like creating that path for the, myself and for, the future students that they will have. So I'm also, along with law school, not only will I be continuing this project, but I'm also hoping to create a foundation as well, just for, making sure the, younger, I say younger generation, but, I am 20, younger than me, the younger, younger than me generation gets the opportunities that they can have and make this new sector as diverse as possible, given that it's a fairly new sector. So the fact that it would be open to such like diverse individuals from the start would help build a foundation for later, instead of it continuing in the way it is now, and then we try to open it up to make it as diverse as possible, because there are brilliant minds that don't get to have the opportunities that we may have, or have the connections that we have, because right now it's a very like connection based also sector as well. So if people don't have that, unfortunately the sector won't be able to benefit from their minds and creativity. So that's another project that I will be working on, is to create this foundation and make sure that people are aware that space technologies can be used more than just to like send people to the moon. Like it could be, there are many, many ways of, before, for example, this work of mine got published, I couldn't talk too much about it. I couldn't give too much detail. So all I said was space technologies for the purpose of human rights and animal welfare. And everyone was like, what on earth are you talking about? Those are three different things and that have nothing to do with each other. So, even people in the sector didn't really, comprehend what that could even mean. So that's what I, want to, raise awareness that way as well. Just because, for example, I came up with this, but if people are more aware of this, I can't even begin to imagine what they will come up with. So, and the world needs that. So that's what I want to also accomplish by that.
Tuana, you are amazing. Remote sensing is not new, but it was used for military purposes. Now, you have found an application that's very useful for humanity, and for the protection of animals that cannot defend themselves. So it's really a good proposal that you have here. How do you see yourself like 10 years from now? You have graduated, and you have, what do you want to use your life for?
That's so great. That's such an interview question right there. That's a classic. Where do you see yourself in 10 years? But I could say all the things that, I can hope for, but as we all have seen in the past few years, anything can happen in a matter of like a day. Everyone's lives changed for the past few years, and, everybody had to adapt to these like new conditions. And so it's an interesting, like philosophical almost approach to the way I'm going to answer this, but there are a lot of uncertainties in this world that we can't control. But the ones that we can't control, they're completely within yourself and, what you can put out, to the world. And what I'm trying to accomplish with everything that I'm, with all the things that I'm trying to tackle at the same time, it's to have, realistically speaking, this isn't going to happen overnight. These plans that I have laid out here, it's going to take a long time. So I will probably still be pursuing, hopefully it won't take 10 years, but we're hoping for it to happen in like the next few years, and for me to be able to build on what has been created, and for other people to build on. That's why, again, the foundation is very important, because after like these, this foundation has been set, we need the creativity of others to like see how this project can be taken even like further. So that's what I will be working on. Law school is again very important for this, but I do recognize like how long it takes to create these laws, because I actually did work, for example, with the mayor of Istanbul. I believe it was the summer of 2019, and I worked with them, to pass a law that banned the use of horse-drawn carriages in the Princess Islands and transferred the entire transportation system to electric cars. And we did that in like 3 months. And it sounds pretty insane to even manage it in 3 months, but the day-to-day I saw just how, how crazy it is to even, because like what we created was that people wouldn't, for example, lose their jobs, their wage would be equal, everything would just be transferred equally. And you try to explain that to some people, and you think it's a pretty sound system that you've created, but people come up with all sorts of problems, for example, just to satisfy their historical nostalgia and continue like abusing the horses just to satisfy that. And even with the most sound plans that you lay out in front of people, the most feasible approaches, you're going to be faced with a lot of problems. And it's going to take a long time to have these these great morally right projects implemented. So to answer your question, in 10 years I might still be battling with this.
Yeah.
Well, Malika, I think woman Natalia had a question. I think Tuana already answered it, but perhaps we might want to have Natalia ask the question before we sign off this morning.
I've left already because I don't see Natalia.
Natalia, if you're there.
No, I don't see Natalia, but maybe we can learn from the horses in Princess Island about abusing horses. We have them in Central Park, and at all times we know they are suffering. I think there were groups that wanted to do something about them, but they're still there, and the same abuse is going on. The other thing is coming back to remote sensing. I don't know how many elephants do you think we can save through this system, like Kenya, for instance, or East Africa? That's where most of the poaching is happening. So do you have, has anyone projected the number of animals that would be saved?
Well, not saved, because again, this kind of system hasn't been proposed before. But for example, if you would like to look at more examples as to like how many like these sorts of illegal poaching, and one would like to learn more statistics, again, it's all in my research. I have in that paper, I have laid out specific examples to portray just how imminent like this issue is. And you mentioned, how, again, I can't give you, I don't think anyone can give a specific number of how many will be saved, but there are, for example, systems that, for example, track the like migration and like of like certain animals, and for example, in Australia. And these companies like Azure Space, they have actually like Microsoft Azure Space, they have reached out to me because for their technology to be able to do that, it can also do the things that I'm proposing with my proposal. Yes, mine isn't tracking migration, but mine is tracking the illegal activity that happens. So again, this is these are all very feasible things to do. It's just more about implementing the system and just working with the laws to properly implement this. If the technology, everything is there, it will work because, like I said, with AI, Earth observation, remote sensing, what I'm vouching for is for it to be preventive measure. when people also know that this is happening, all the technology is there, and that hotspot specifically is being monitored and resolutions up to, like, 12 inches, it will also deter people from wanting to perform these acts as well. Because if, for example, you're being, surveillance in that hotspot for, all day, every day, would you want to just, wave hello to the satellites and then, continue doing that illegal activity? It's like, they will have that data and they will be sent to the, to the rightful, agencies within the government. So, but I'm
Tuana,
more preventive measures.
Tuana, as a former prosecutor, I can actually tell you that I think every country would welcome what you're proposing, because these illegal activities operate in a void and, behind closed doors. And once you open the window and let the sunshine in, simply the ability to identify where these illegal activities are happening will, as you've just said, will be a preventative measure. It's when people can do things and get away with it that they're encouraged to do it. Once they realize, hey, I'm going to be under a spotlight, people will be able to identify me. The train will be able to see. You'll see it's not just the poacher in Kenya, Malika, but it's the exporter, importer, and the market, the people making money on this, who are then shipping it to a place where it's going. Once they're identified, that's one way of stopping the problem. So, but I think, Malika, we've come to the end. I don't think there are any other questions.
Yes,
I don't.
so President Gerard, do you want to close the meeting? It's
your chair, please do so.
It's been a pleasure to have you here. You're absolutely amazing. Your proposal is amazing and very, very interesting. I wish you all the best in pursuing your passions. And it's been a very, very interesting talk. Thank you very much for your presentation.
And I will just end by saying, Tuana Yazici, I think you've hit on something which I know is quite workable. I've done similar things that you're doing, not in the area you're doing it, but environment, and I've never lost a case. It works, and just stick with it. It will happen. And just because it has not been done before doesn't mean it's not going to be done now. It will be done. And I applaud what you're doing. I think you're doing great work. And
in your future, I see, because, when you're a young lady, eventually will get married. I hope that your partner will let you do whatever you want.
That's a mother speaking now.
And being a pilot, because I know some girls who became pilots, but they could not touch a plane after they got married, because then they had the children, it was too dangerous, and they tell you all kinds of things. So just take advantage of now and do the things that you love to do. And eventually, and it are very, very profitable to humanity. Thank you again. And now,
Tuana, I will, if I may interject, Tuana, we would like to stay in touch with you because I personally know some companies that might be interested in working with you. So we'll see.
And I believe you have my contact information. And
yes, we do.
That was the point. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time.
John German now is